And there was no other place for it.
It works. It's wonderful, right?
Everyone for attending. I'm Roger Sadak. Pleased to meet all of you. Many of you I know. This is the 8th show by David McCosh that we've done here at the gallery, and after the first 7 we decided it was time to do something a little bit different by inviting some of the other painters who paint in the same tradition as McCosh, this wonderful tradition that's evidenced by Paul Cézanne and John Constable and the great painters of the 19th and 20th century, and we have many of them here in the room today, which is wonderful. 2 of whom are going to be speaking to us. Mark Clarke, who you all know, one of Oregon's great painters, studied with David years ago, became a good friend and colleague, and now is really one of David's peers. You know, when we look at these paintings on the wall, we're seeing the end of a process. And Mark today is going to show us the beginning of the process and how it comes to be the paintings that we see on these walls, and we'll learn some of what David taught him and some of the things Mark's picked up himself over the years. John J. Cruzon, another one of our great painters, and also a really fine lithographer who studied lithography with McCosh, taught lithography with him at Oregon, and made a number of lithographs in his career. We'll talk about the interesting topic of how lithography and painting relate to one another, both in McCosh's work and John's work and what we see around us. So we'll start with Mark. By the way, this apron we're going to frame and auction off.
Anybody got any duct tape?
Okay. So Mark, go ahead, take it away.
Thank you all for coming. This is the time when I can make a big fool of myself. I want to recommend that if you get real tired, don't pass out. Go across the street and have a cup of coffee or something. Hopefully a pretty fast demonstration, because I don't want to have you all standing out here for too long. A little bit about equipment first. This is my outdoors setup, my folding easel, palette that I've got wired down, a little water. I'm going to be using acrylics today, and some painting medium, a spray bottle that is very handy to have out in the bush when on a warm day. The paint dries so fast that sometimes if you're not on top of that, things begin to dry up real fast. So I'm just going to start laying these out with a long bristled, oh, by the way, if you got a question, I might be able to answer. Don't count on it, especially under the circumstances. Write me a note, I'll get it. I've laid out some color here that close to what Dave would suggest that we use as students. There's 7 colors and white for the painting class, all painting class. And for the watercolor class, there was something like five colors. And some unusual colors, a mix, for example, blue, which, I'll just do that right now. There's a little bit of violet purple with, I'll put a little white in it so you can see what it looks like. with let's see, what is it? I've lost track here. A green, a phthalo green. And it ends up looking something like this, which is the blue in all of this. I put that up there because we're going to be diluting out some of that in a little bit. Right now, I think what I'll do is start out with a dark line drawing using a little broken handle, cheap hog hair, China bristle, 15-cent brush, what's left of it. And the way this works is just simply getting a little water on that. And there's a little bit of medium. This is transparent gloss medium, and I put a little bit of that out when I'm diluting the paint, because if you get it too thin, you might not get it stuck on the color stuck on the support, the canvas or board. So I'm going to mix up those two again in a darker, a little bit darker language. So this is always a little nerve-wracking, I have to tell you. I normally am down in the basement, hidden away from people. No one wants me to leave. Anyway, so we have a beach scene kind of. Well, let's see, there's some logs and small pieces and driftwood and so on and so forth. This is about a half hour, 45 minutes stuff. So I put across the top. We're dragging the brush. This is something that Makash suggested. He said, rather than go like this, like you would a pencil, you could drag it across, like this. You see that in some of these paintings. Dragging it across. Get in that areas. It doesn't have to be too exact. You can always change things, paint over things. And I have to say, I never know what I'm going to end up with, so this might be a portrait. A self-portrait, there's hope. Anyway, I'm going to get some of the larger chunks of driftwood in there. This is a log. Hopefully it'll look like a log. So this is another one. There's a few. I'm doing this a little faster, trying to do this a little faster. There's one that goes down like so. Looks like a hot dog. Back in here, there's another log that comes up here that has a little bit of bark left on it. There's a little bit of sand that comes back in here. There's a log that's down into here. And then this is all filled in with little bits of driftwood and rock. This may be about the best it'll ever be, right here. But it's kind of like a glorified color book. When you get done, get this all in place, you can put in a little bit of color and it starts to come alive. Okay, this is rock and driftwood and so on. Up here, all through here, is beach. With some incoming ocean water with breakers and so on and so forth. So, down in here, there's just a little bit of that beach grass that comes in there. Okay. Now at that point, you have some options. You can just start painting color on it, or you could go back in and pick up a little different color and reestablish some of this. See, that's a little bit darker. That's a purple that goes in there. If you want to lower it a little bit or change this a little bit, you can go back over it. You can also sometimes have a little time to give it a spritz and wipe out some color. I'm just going to paint this color. But see how it's pretty much set up by now. That's the amazing thing with acrylics. you got to be aware of that fast drying time. So we're going to start putting on a little color, and I'm going to pick out another expensive brush that I got out at Harbor Freight. Should be in here. Buy these brushes, I think there's 32 to a box for less than $7. Such a deal. Anyway, I've used, seems like hundreds of these things. We'll put a little water on it, dip it in the medium, which I buy by the gallon from Utrecht, which where all this paint comes from. So we're going to mix a little sky color. And David said, at one point, you know, he'd come around class and give you advice or a little little item, a little bit of information about changing something that's not quite right, or a hint about color mixing. And it was always seemed to me, always in the classroom, looking over shoulders and helping people out. It's a wonderful experience. So I'm going to start off with just some loose blobs, chips of paint, as you call it. And you see that in a lot of his watercolors. And also he suggested that maybe you can use some of that color in another area down low or something. So I'm going to put a little bit of that into some of the driftwood. It's not very tight yet. And that's something I want to maintain, something fairly loose. These cheap brushes, you can't really get too tight with them. They look like a bad hairdo after all. Anyway, the next level is, in the background, is a bit of dark, more green. I mean, there again, it's the phthalo green mixing with a pinch of the purple. Dip into the medium, and this area back here is ocean in a little bit different color. That's too light. I'm going to put a little more purple in. Now I'm just going to go in here with real loose. And we'll come back into this and paint it around it a little bit more. We've got the dark color on the brush. I'm going to go down into the area that has shadow and I'll put that down in here. And there's one area back in here. And is that the vodka for the? I'm better at painting. I have a little drink here and there. So anyway. Okay, this is sort of like, you know, bringing the painting all up at once. That was something he encouraged. You don't want to finish anyone, like tighten this up and kind of get a finished look up here before you get the rest coming along. He didn't like that idea. He liked to work in, as you can tell on some of his pieces, he liked to work all over the whole surface. So bring it all up at once. So I'm going to change color a little bit. Still using this dirty old brush. Mix a little bit of yellow and a little bit of quinacridone. No, this is not quinacridone. This is red oxide. That's a real potent color. And we'll put a little bit down in here. See, that picks that up a little bit. And there's another one right back. And a little bit, just for good measure. And then we'll move out into the beach. And that's a mixture of, there's a little bit of that purple color, and a little pinch of this red, which I use a color called quinacridone. I can't spell it, but I use a lot of it. And it's, one of these days I'll have to pay attention to the label. But it makes wonderful reds and maroons, those two combinations. So I'll put a little green in there to soften it up, a little white. Now I'll go down here and see if this will work. Yeah, this is going to be a kind of pink beach for right now. Okay, we got that in place for a little bit, and it goes down into here. There's an umber on here, simply burnt umber, which is a brownish color. And that's going to go in with that blue and that other mixture, and we're going to make a beach color. That goes right in here. And that's too dark. We'll put a little more white in it. It's still too dark. Put a little more white in. That's going to have to dry for it. And let's see where we've lost some of the. There's more in there. A little more in here. The underside of that. Get it to a point where we get most of this covered up, and then go back in and we'll draw a little bit more. A little bit of foliage that's in this area, just one clump of that grass that grows around back in there. Okay, then we go back, start filling in some of these areas. This will make it jump out. That's almost pure quinacridone. This is a little bit of a dry brush technique in some of it. You see this sort of thing. And it doesn't take very much acrylic on a smooth surface to get some paint out there, spread out. So put that in there. Let's see if we could. Just see. What are we doing? Got it. Crank up here. Okay, I'm going to dip into the medium and come back in some of these areas with what I have on, and push that around a little bit with the rag. And this is a wonderful addition to the paint because it's you can use it like a transparent color, you see here. And sometimes I'll just do this. You can bring together a whole area of composition by just putting that on there and just kind of bringing it in to tie things together, shapes together. Up here at the top, we can put a little bit more. We can go back in over some of this. See how that, it's kind of like using watercolor. And then we'll pull another area down here. This could go on and on and on and on because just working down here for an hour or a half hour or whatever is really not, it's just getting things started. A lot of my work ends up being, quite thick with many, many layers of paint, one over another, and the final picture doesn't tell the whole story. There's just a whole lot of painting, a whole lot of paint underneath, changes made, and nowadays you have equipment that can x-ray paintings, and I saw Picasso was x-rayed one time, started with several figures, and ended up a horse. We have hope here. Get ready for the horse. Okay, this is just going to fill it all up here. This dry brush. But that drawing remains, is what's wonderful. And then you can come back in eventually and tidy up things and get things real tight if you want. I like to keep a lot of paintings soft, kind of loose at this point. There's back in here, which I've forgotten about, there's actually a bit of waves that come back in. I'll just wipe that out. Go back, while I'm thinking about it, go back up and put a little bit more color into the top band of sky. This is going to be lighter. It has the medium on it, so it kind of pull all that together. Different color, quite different color. What becomes a little more interesting, I think, is you look at Dave's work and what he can do in one area, just a whole bunch of little chips of color is really interesting, and then pulls a lot of that together with line work. Put some of this down here. Now go back over it with a thinner brush, and you can mix a little bit of that dark color again with a little bit of umber. And this is a long bristle brush and kind of a ratty brush. And I left a little brush at home called a rigger brush, which is just is the type of brush you use in a lot of these watercolors with the calligraphy type handling. So I go back in and start dragging this brush around, and you get to, you can see how that, the dark shades started. That goes a little farther. Fat grass. Now we begin to put a little bit more opaque paint in, build up the paint. And in watercolors, that overpainting, you see a thick paint that's gouache. And this is kind of similar to using gouache over the color, give a little bit of light in it. When we paint this, some of these shapes back in, you can start eliminating part of the drawing and start building the paint up. See how thick that can get. It's kind of loose and ragged. if something gets too thick too soon, somewhere in here, within a reasonable amount of time, you can come and scrape off something that's thick, and it'll dry a little faster. It also gives you kind of a nice smooth, smooshing it around like this. That's something you can do with this real glass.
And a technical term, smooshing.
Smooching? Well, we don't want to get personal. There is other smooching. She knows more about the others. I'm not up for smooching at this point. Okay, we're coming back into here. Kind of dirtying up some of those colors. I sort of abandoned that little study, which is, as far as I'm concerned, the right way to do it. I know John is anxious to get in here and do all this. Give him his talk.
Mark, do you ever work from photographic studies?
Yeah, a little bit in pieces. The best way is to be out there on location. What I try to do when I get outside and paint is to paint for a couple hours and then I go out for coffee and think about it. Should I go on or what? But to bring about 2 hours of painting, I think I can get enough information to take it back to the studio and work on it. A lot of painters do that. But this kind of a thing is a little bit unusual. Going back in and around that beach, and it may end up that they'll have to all be there because they're all painted different colors, but maybe this turns out to be something in a few days. These old logs and chunks of wood, when you think about it, they must have come from up in the hills someplace and got into a stream and kicked around in the ocean and then ended up in a pile on the coast. It's just wonderful, wonderful stuff. There's not as much now on the beaches as there used to be, but you find these little pockets of, like a fence around the smaller pieces of material. And in painting, that's that sort of subject matter off and on for several years. And it was folks up at the university, at Oregon State University, that got me started in that. And then when I discovered David McCosh, it really got to be interesting. Well, I think you see the idea of this thing. I don't know where it's going, but well, get back up here and guys again. Coming there with dark ups and interesting. Anybody have any questions? Is there anybody left out here? Yeah.
You said you sometimes disappear into the basement for hours at a time to work on this. How is the light there in the basement as opposed to here?
It's still under artificial light off down in the basement. I have two fluorescent tubes. I have a 7.5 foot ceiling, so the tubes are up in frame.
Oh.
And 2 floods that come in from an angle. So it gives me pretty good unnatural light. When I bought my son was a painting, I can't, oh my God, it's that bad. It's quite different. There's one window in the basement, which it's so unusual I have it covered over with a piece of cardboard. Anyway, I'm going to do just a little tad more.
So are you painting more shape and color than
thinking about like light and,
Yeah, I don't paint in the dark. but if I could. But I always have to have some light someplace. But I sort of feel like if I can see something, I'll paint. I don't wait for special kind of light. Though on the coast, you can be painting along everything just fine with certain, and then all of a sudden the whole ocean will disappear, and maybe on up to the where you're working, and wait for the fog. Time for coffee or something. But that's one nice thing about acrylic. If there's some kind of a situation that will just be there for a while, you can get that in with this fast drying acrylic paint real fast, and then it'll change, and maybe the sun will pop out. But I don't know how far you go with this thing, guys. I usually just at a point add some lighter color in it, and then the next step would be to put some glazes in over that color. What do I use? The transparent, like that's some of these. That's right. You can go with a little bit of water in that in the medium. We have a transparent. This would be. I don't know if you can see that underneath it again, but you can fiddle around with this glazing and I'll put a couple shapes together here. See how that could be. And wipe some of that out. Well, I think we're good. What do you think? Is this enough to get you all out painting? But this is just kind of the way it goes. You put a layer of, you do some drawing, you put a layer of paint, you do some more drawing over it, and you put another layer of paint, and it keeps going. And after a while, you begin to see something that maybe was saving. But I can stand here for another hour and keep working on it.
When Roger asked me to show and bring in some work for this show, I decided to bring in one lithograph because my contact with David McCosh was 5 years in lithography, which amounts to about 15 terms. And although I did take watercolor and drawing from David, my main contact daily for at least twice a week for 5 years was in lithography. I'm going to read some comments that I've written down in relationship to lithography and painting. The relationship that exists between the work the artist does in painting and lithography is an important one. It helps the artist recognize the particular potentialities of each process. In many ways, though, these processes are similar. Both use a drawing tool, whether it is a crayon, a brush, a pencil. They also face one thing, a blank surface. They have to make a decision what to put down on the first mark. It can be a line, it can be a patch, it can be a tone, it can be light or dark. Something in front of nothing. A certain amount of discipline of understanding the material is necessary. Both in each case, otherwise you have a mess. The creative process is the same. Something in front of nothing. Now, where did I hear that term? For 5 years, I heard it from David McCosh. Something in front of nothing. So when you think of a blank surface, whether it's a stone or if it's canvas, you have nothing, and then you put something down. But then if you put something down on top of that, is that something in front of nothing or nothing in front of something? So it gets you starting to think of the process that you're working on. So you are developing an image, responding to what one sees, not to what one knows. So if you're looking at a still life, whether it's in lithography, which David used to have on the shelf, and if you're working from that, let's say there are 12 artists in the room, or lithographers, or students. There's 12 different sets of eyes that see things differently. Not only the mechanical skill is different, but also we see things differently. So when you go back from one surface to the next surface, you're starting to see what you have here and what you have there. And so it's important that you start to see what you see rather than what you know. When I look at this piece here, which could be very easy lithograph, tones and color, and most printmakers are working in black, and most printmaking, we work in black and white, but we think in color. And so these could be easily gray tones put on a lithostone with an edge of a crayon and then printed. And so if I start to look at some of David's other pieces that get fairly complex, I start to question which was first, the patch or the line. And so it's becoming a development. And also they can pull each other together compositionally. And David had a specific way of teaching watercolor, drawing, and lithography. And he gave us all a very strong foundation. Some of us grew from that, some of us stopped working because we went into other professions. But I think the idea of something in front of nothing, when you start to look at David's work, you'll start to see that and starting to wonder which came first, which ties what together compositionally. And I think it's a very fascinating process. I look at this as color. And for us that work a lot in black and white, we see the gray values of tones and marks as color. And although in printing there are differences in printing and painting. But basically the similarities is the way you approach it, the way you handle your materials, understanding the materials and the process of the composition, and what you're seeing out there and what you're coming back to. And the difference also is some of these are watercolor, some of these are canvas. So the surface difference is also important. In lithograph, we have one basically, well, I was brought up with a stone, not metal plates or paper plates, so there is only one surface as far as I'm concerned in lithography, and that's a stone surface. And so that's basically what I wanted to talk about. So are there any questions? So it's really short, and I'll let Mark take over. No.
Where's your press?
And so I have done that before, and I'm not going to do it today, though, is bringing in the press. So are there any questions about the combination or the connection between lithography and painting? It's pretty short.
I have a question, not about that, but so when you're a student, and this may be kind of obvious, but do you leave and you're working on lithostones at the university, do you leave them there, or do you tote them back and forth? Or
No,
how
well,
does that
David,
work?
you left the stones in the studio.
You did, okay.
You did not take the stones out. That was a given. I think when you after you leave the university, if you have access to a printing press and stones, then you can do that depending on who you're printing with or who owns the stones in the situation. But and that was one thing that David, one thing I started to do is I started wearing white shirts into lithography. Because once I damaged a shirt with inks, the next time I wore a white shirt in, I made sure I was very careful. And it also helped me get no extra fingerprints on anything. And so my printing became more precise, more clean, and I didn't have a mess. So it was a forced way of making sure that things worked. Yes?
Could you elaborate a little more on the thinking in color, that the printing in black and white, there's a couple of, the drawing in a black and white, a couple of things on that wall? I mean, if it's possible that
Well,
it could,
I see this as a range of color. Now, for some of you that are not used to that term when you look at black and white, I see these as color. I just don't see them as, they're rich, they're tones. They have the same character as color does to me. I don't think of this as yellow or purple in that sense. I think of them as rich colors, as in tones. It's the same thing in this one. Let's say this was a lithograph. If I were going to be printing it in color, that's a whole different thing. But basically, then I'm thinking completely different. Because I have to figure out, okay, how am I going to, basically in lithography, you draw all or paint or work with the black and white range. And then you change the inks when you're rolling up to color. So you have to think, that's a layering process, which happens in painting. It's a layering process, but it's a different type of process. So in painting, it is layering. Yes, Peg?
Oh, just along that line, I recall one time Makash saying that people think of Van Gogh just for his paintings, but he thought his drawings were equally important. In fact, he thought he invented a new way of drawing. And he specifically mentioned, you know how there's areas where there's dots in filling in, say, a field or something, and there's places where there's lines or dashes or something. He said that he used those different kinds of textures to code colors.
To code color, yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
So John, do you work on lithography and painting simultaneously?
When
or you tend to
I
just
no
go
longer
from
work
one
in
or the other?
lithography.
Okay.
I worked probably from, well, it was 5 years in undergraduate and graduate school, and then I continued working in lithography for another 20-some years. When I worked in lithography in school I worked in both. And then after school I worked usually lithography twice a week, usually in the evenings. And then I painted the rest, so it was back and forth. And for me, they fed each other. Because I go to one, it was a different activity. Painting physically is this, back and forth. Lithography, you have a menial task of grinding the stones, carrying the stones, rolling the stones, cranking the press. So there's another type of physical task that is different than in painting. And painting can be very arduous too, don't get me wrong there, but it's a different task. You're not lifting and moving. So no, I alternated. I worked in both mediums at the same time, not at the same time, but within the same week, yes. And they fed each other mentally to me. And yes?
Well, following on that, and saying that you haven't done lithography, what, 5 years or?
Since last century, let's see. I like that term, we did this last century, which all of us can say.
Do you miss that?
Yes, I do.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
It's something I very much enjoyed and basically loved. I love the drawing. There's a different surface on the stones that you can't get anyplace else. And I like the balance of the physical and the menial task, and then the chemical task of etching, and the physical task of listening to the ink and feeling the ink, because when you feel, you can tell if the ink's right by the way it pulls on the roller. The pressure on the press, the hand press, you can tell the feeling if it feels right. There's a physical mental contact there that you don't, it's a different contact than in painting. Although in painting, you do get that kickback in a different way.
Well, John, thank you very much. That was just right. Our show is primarily about painting. I asked John to be sure to include one of his really beautiful lithographs. So do be sure you take a look at it before you leave. It's a
And then
great
also too, there's 3 of David McCosh's lithographs on this back side of the wall. There was a question that we all had, was why David didn't do a lot of lithographs after he got here. Because that's one of the things that he did love when he was in Chicago, and he did some wonderful lithography. Not only made a lithography, he was a master technician in the medium. He devoted his time to teaching 40 hours a week when he got here, and his time was limited. And his decision to pursue painting over printmaking was basically what was the difference. But he was also a wonderful teacher in lithography, as it was in painting.
Well, thanks again, John. Mark and John will be around for a while, so don't hesitate to ask some questions. And two of our other painters are also here. Peg Noe, who many of you know in the doorway, and Betsy Cole, who's seated in the chair right there. So please take this opportunity to speak with them and talk to them about their painting, Akash's painting, and painting in general. Thank you all for coming today. you.